Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Red Sand podcast. I'm Nicole Anderson from Red Sand, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have two guests with me. And I hope to say two friends, one new and one quite old. We'll go into that probably on the podcast together, but from very different vantage points. So the theme today is data disruption and the AI enterprise ready organization. And with me, I have both two experts in the field. So I have Gareth Stokes. Gareth is global co-chair of the tech practice and part of the leadership team for the AI practice at DLA Piper. Welcome, Gareth.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I have Simon Turner, who is CTO at Foil. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you.
Great to have you. So, gents, I'd love to get the conversation started just by you introducing yourselves, your backgrounds very briefly, and what makes you both so excited right now at this. We've all had careers in technology from different vantage points, as I said, but what makes you particularly excited at this point in history? Starting with you, Gareth.
Thanks. So a bit of background on me. I like to describe myself as a recovering technology lawyer. I started out 20 years ago in technology transactions, so licensing, IT outsourcing, business process outsourcing, systems integration projects, all of those sorts of things. So large-scale technology vendor providing some kind of big technology solution, usually over multiple years, to customers. And for a large part of that, that was about expertise. It was very often about labor arbitrage in terms of the commercials. And that was what was driving those deals. And then in around about 2014 or something like that, I'd always been what we now call a nerd with pride, and what was possibly not said with quite as much pride back 20 years ago. But I'd always been a great follower of technology. And I'd followed all of the various different developments in chess computing and those sorts of things back in the day. I was fascinated to see IBM's Watson winning Jeopardy back in 2011. And then we had the privilege to be doing some of the earliest deals where IBM were actually implementing Watson as part of the solution that they were providing to clients. That forces a very different kind of conversation, because now we're not talking about taking a service and delivering it in the same way from several thousand miles away. We're talking about fundamentally re-engineering that service and actually delivering it with a completely different solution that doesn't necessarily need to be located in any one place. And so that was my journey from going from being a kind of traditional tech transactions lawyer to being an AI lawyer. And as that gained pace, as we sort of started to see, Google's Attention is All You Need paper in 2017, and then the explosion of generative AI in the early 2020s, that went from being slightly speculative conversations I was very often having with clients to being absolutely at the heart of everything that they were doing. And now we're seeing an explosion of interest. Everybody's talking about AI all the time. We're probably sort of in the doldrums of the hype curve to some extent. Everyone's had that initial excitement, and they're now seeing where it can really be used in anger. And we're having reports sort of talking about, failed proofs of concept and things like that, and actually where can you monetize this properly. But that's actually the most exciting bit for me, the bit where everybody is suddenly over the height of the hype curve and is actually talking about the real world opportunity and has realized where this does work and doesn't work.
Well, we're going to come to that, because that is the absolute kind of starting point for the discussion today. But fantastic, thank you for that. So Simon, over to you. Introduction.
I was just listening to Gareth describe himself as a nerd with pride, sort of from 20 years ago. Well, I was just thinking, imagine what it was like being a nerd 35 years ago, because that was me. I mean, I've been a software engineer all my life, and a deeply passionate nerd, if you like, in that regard. And it's what gets me up in the morning, that ability to experiment, push, and develop technology has been what's driven me all my career. I started very much as a software engineer doing computing science at university, where we met, what was that, 31 years ago, which was kind of an interesting reflection, because back then if you wanted to do an installation, if you wanted to go and see clients, you had to literally go and see them. You had to literally travel, hence us meeting. Now it's a very different space. You do everything remotely and at distance, which I think is an interesting kind of corollary to where we are today in terms of decentralization versus centralization. That the other thing I had as a passion years ago was things like Meccano and Lego. So that ability to build things has always fascinated me. The progression that we've seen over the last 35 years is just its constant increase in speed. The bit that has fascinated me over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I think about 18 months, 2 years ago, we saw an inflection point where the speed of change of technology was outpacing our ability to drive value from it. And that's a real challenge because all of a sudden clients are faced with this dilemma of when do you get on the train? How do you get past an investigation? I kind of shudder at the word POC, but how do you do a POC, get to the end of it and realize that the world's moved on? Do you implement instant technical debt or do you go around it again? And I know, as Gareth said, we're talking about these challenges with POCs in AI. How do we get past that? How do we get to a point of being able to realize value? Realize value in itself is a challenging word with AI anyway. How do we get past the POC side of things and deliver real value in production in that space? I think the bit that we're struggling with at the moment, or wrestling with at the moment, is how do we get clients to see past basic automation and getting, I mean, my favorite quote at the moment is Arthur C. Clarke, who said that any suitably advanced technology will look like magic.
Yes.
What we find with a lot of our clients is they view AI in exactly that way, which is fine. The problem is they suspend critical thought and critical reasoning around that. And so how do you question, where do the boundaries sit? What can this do? What can't this do? And more importantly, what shouldn't it do?
Yep.
And that, I think, is where some really, really interesting transformations happening at the moment with the technology. And then how do we get that to reflect in transformation within businesses?
So, I mean, you've both started touching this readiness debate, right? And I think if you had 100 people and you asked, where are you on your journey, as an executive in terms of AI adoption, they'll come with 100 different answers, or with different friction points and potential, opportunities. So if we could really just aggregate and step back, and generalize for the sake of simplicity, Gareth, in your world, what are the typical issues that, assuming, net, I know we're going to touch on the data topic in detail probably with you, Simon, but net, what are the kind of critical things that an enterprise needs to consider should they get serious about moving beyond POC, or even just dipping their waters into the first kind of serious investments in AI? Are they coming to you with concerns? Are they coming to you with aspirations? Are they coming to you to lean on advice along the journey? Just give us some semblance of what you typically see with clients.
That's a really interesting question. There are such a wide range of people doing such a wide range of different things that we're working with, from, frontier model vendors who are actually out there training and building these things and have got a very different set of concerns, through to organizations that are far more used to being at the trailing edge of technology, are comfortable being later adopters because they see that as being a way of taking a very well-worn pathway at that point, and one that for them has got relatively lower risk. And there are organizations on every single point of the spectrum between those two. I think that the thing that resonates for me most strongly, though, is the organizations that have been really, really clear-eyed about actually solving a problem, not sort of implementing AI for its own sake or jumping on AI as a buzzword and sort of saying, oh, we must be using this for something. What's the thing we're going to do with it? And instead, they've looked at a particular problem and they've looked at all of the possible ways of solving that problem, and they've realized that actually something involving AI is actually the best possible solution to that problem. and they implement that in that context with the appropriate guardrails around it, they're the organizations that are actually getting ahead. Now, there are lots of things that are involved in doing that. You've got to have, first of all, the right kind of leadership who are having the right kinds of conversations in the first place and have got the right kind of strategic approach. You've got to have the right kind of governance model that allows people to sort of be flexible in the way that they innovate with these things, but actually know what they're aiming for in terms of those things. You've got to have the right kind of experimental environment and training data and all of those sorts of things in order to be able to actually prove that that is going to work and it is actually going to deliver value. And then you've got to have the right talent and team to get it from something that's experimental and, you know, works with sticking plaster and binding twine through to something that is robust in production and has been tested and has proven in all of those edge cases where actually an awful lot of these things break. It's relatively easy to build something that is impressive for the kind of the middle 60% of the bell curve, but breaks horribly in the outer 40% of the bell curve. Yes. And I think it's that bit that's very difficult. I can hear Simon laughing next to him as if he's thinking of specific examples. So maybe I'll stop talking there.
But we get the same. I mean, the opener of we must do more AI.
Yeah.
We get all the time, and you look at people quizzically and say, what does that really mean? And it's but so and so, and I've read this and I've seen this, and so said, and that's all you tend to get a lot of the time. And find the business case first, find the problem, then work out if AI, as Gareth said, is the solution, without trying to. I'm going to contradict myself slightly. I was going to say without shoehorning it in. Now, there is also the experimentation in terms of how do you test the edge cases? How do you test the boundaries of what the technology can do? And equally, how do you keep up with the insane pace of change that we're seeing at the moment? And that does require, to your point, experimentation. It requires, and it requires the right level of bravery from the leadership and the right culture in that space, because failure is inevitable, but it's working out what lessons you learn from that and how does that still factor into delivering value, and what does that mean in that regard? And that's a really interesting part of the questions that we have, the conversations that we have with the clients, is working out where does that value really sit? And sometimes it can be a really simple implementation of AI. We were at a conference for charities last week, and they were very inquisitive, but at that very sort of entry level of terms of how do we use AI? What does it mean? But equally with that very cautious level of we've got to do this ethically and responsibly and correctly in that space. And there was a lot of dilemmas in that regard as well, which was good to see, healthy to see. But it does mean that finding and drilling into that right use case is often challenging. And as you said at the beginning, there are all sorts of factors, whether it's culture or environment or even data readiness that stops those things progressing properly and stops them delivering the right level of value. And I know I keep banging on about that, but to Gareth's point, it is really easy to produce something that looks good and that, again, with people that have suspended their kind of critical thought, they'll see something and go, wow, that's brilliant. And a lot of the vendors are happy to go, oh, yeah, great.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm so glad because, sorry to cut across you, but I mean, I've been itching to kind of like for someone to kind of mention that. So we've teased it out somewhat saying, you know, we're in this, I guess, this slight, let's say, you know, kind of doldrum cycle, thanks to Mr. Burry last week. I think it was last week. Time moves so quickly. And so we're seeing this settling in of markets and sentiment around AI, which is only healthy. But absolutely, Simon, I mean, the speed of innovation is predominantly a vendor-driven agenda. And right through the AI stack, the frustration is, you know, customers... Like it's tail-wagging dog to a large degree. And, you know, we see it with customers where they, on an infrastructure side, of course, you know, you can imagine, right, 60% of the budget very often. So they're led by the latest model. That is, as an example. Really, the use cases, tying back to the use cases are so fundamental, okay, and nascent that there's this huge gap between capacity of the technology and what the vendor is pushing and what they really need. And, ethically, I don't know if that's the right word, but there is this gap between guidance. There is not enough guidance, and that's why I really wanted you both on the call, because there's sense has to come into the market. I mean, we've got this massive gap between where the vendors are pushing the agenda and where customers really are on the agenda.
There's a huge level of AI immaturity in all areas of that. And this is going to make me sound really old, but one of the advantages of age is that we've seen this before.
Yes.
I mean, was it I'm fascinated by chess computers. 1983, we had the winter of AI winter, I think it was. And it wasn't until IBM and Deep Blue that everyone said, maybe there is something in this AI. And it came back round and there was investment again. And one of the things I'm super conscious of at the moment is we can't necessarily afford for a bubble. I mean, and I don't think there is, but making sure that we navigate that as a challenge, I think is hugely important, because that's a real concern, because that would have a big economical impact. But it makes me chuckle when you talk about the importance of models, which really has only been a topic of conversation for the last 2 years or so.
Years.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's very, and I mean, we could talk simply about models, I'm sure, for a couple of hours, but it's very, very interesting how we navigate those at a business value level, and where do people not get usurped by that level of hype and hysteria that is created within the market and that agenda that vendors have, because it is, to your point, it's a vendor-driven space at the moment.
Yeah,
and I get it. They need returns on their investments, but clients and customers need to understand what that means for this sounds terribly marketing, but for their journey, because it's going to evolve, it's going to change all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, but obviously there are headwinds, and I'd hate to think of frameworks and regulation and, guardrails as headwinds. They really are necessary. And just our time, thank you for the invite last week in Amsterdam, Gareth, but clearly your tech summit at DLA was certainly for a novice in terms of, the complexity of navigation of what is happening across jurisdiction in terms of data and AI is a minefield. How typically are you, aiding that with customers so that, they've got to consider that before they begin in any earnest, right? Especially a multinational. Could you bring that to life in terms of some of the kind of, examples that you're working with on a daily basis?
Yeah, and I think that, it's very easy to see, any kind of rule-based system, whether that's external or internal, as necessarily being something that is constraining innovation or is there to get in the way or, becomes the Department of Business Prevention in some sense. There's all of these charges that are made at sort of legal and risk and compliance and all of these functions. But actually, whether we're talking about a set of rules that are external in the form of regulations and standards, or whether we're talking about things that are internal in terms of governance and policies, actually done correctly, what those can do is help to, first of all, build a massive amount of trust and certainty, but also allow people to feel confident in actually going out there and innovating against something where they know that there's a target to hit and a standard to exceed that will therefore get permission. So the classic is organizations that don't necessarily have internal policies and governance. We see this sort of sclerotic behavior internally where everyone's sort of going, there's AI out there and I can maybe be doing something with it, but I don't know who to go to and I feel like I get told no, and all I see is a whole load of people who are getting banned or slapped on the wrist or whatever it is for experimenting with these things. Therefore, I'm not going to do anything. Or if I really, really am passionate about this, I'm going to go and do it somewhere else, and I'm going to take my talents and skills to a competitor who has a better environment for me. And externally, we see exactly the same thing where, in the best case, where you have a set of rules and regulations, that actually creates public trust and it allows people to innovate with technologies in a way that gains consumer confidence and means that we don't feel like every single interaction with a business is automatically a scam that's sort of seeking to sort of skim off our data and use it for ill. So there is some benefit to all of this if you can get it right. The danger is that we are in a space where technology is changing extremely quickly. The rules are not necessarily keeping up with that, and separate rules are being set in lots of different areas, and those rules overlap and don't say the same thing in the same way. So you end up with this environment where people find it almost impossible to comply, even if they want to, because they look at this sort of hugely overlapping set of rules and they say, I don't know what it means. It isn't sufficiently clear to me. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And if I comply with X, I might not be complying with Y and Z because they're sort of touching on the same topic, but saying it in different terms and creating different standards. So one of the things that's happening at the moment, and which will be coming out later this month, is the European Union is re-looking at this digital decade set of legislative standards that they've put out there, whether it's the AI Act or GDPR or the Data Act or NIS2 or the CRA or any of these other pieces of legislation around digital technologies in their broadest sense. All of these, they've deliberately created an extraterritorial reach. So these are not just an EU issue. These are an issue for anybody who's touching on EU data in any way. And they've realised that they probably need to sort of look at those again and create some clarity, some simplification and some consistency. So we're expecting a digital omnibus package to be published later this month. There have been various different rumours around what it may or may not say. The more optimistic of those are sort of painting a picture of a sort of relatively high level of clarity and simplification for business, which, if those prove true, I think will be broadly a very good thing because it will bring that clarity that's much needed and it will allow people a clear target to shoot at. But there's definitely still that challenge of, you hear it being trotted out of the US innovates, Europe regulates. And I don't think that's a fair accusation at all. I think there's an awful lot of innovation that's been happening with talent from this side of the Atlantic. Yeah. And I think there's an awful lot of regulatory uncertainty in the United States as well. I don't think that this is a problem that lands in a sort of clear, bright line way on either side. And there's certainly a different litigation landscape in the US that creates an additional legal risk as well. But more clarity, better standards, and a clearer target to shoot at will definitely be better for everybody. And I think really will engender public trust and give people a target to shoot at.
Excellent. Well, this month, that's good news, Christmas present. So
interesting reading.
Yeah.
I think you said it there about simplicity, because the trust, I think, is just so important. And the other word you used was certainty, which I think is two words which are not always synonymous with AI and implementations in that space. But it's one of the things that helps to foster usage in that space. I think if users don't have trust in the systems and don't understand where the boundaries of certainty lie, they won't adopt it in the way that will drive value in that space. And it's hugely important. I think whilst the legislation is fragmented and overlapping, it does create huge amounts of confusion and people don't know which way to turn. And it is incredibly difficult. Apart from the fact that just measuring trust is really difficult. I have a big rant about bias and where does that actually come from? And bias is a very personally subjective thing. So, how do you measure that? It comes from the data. And if you're not sure about the data and the way a model's been trained, if that's opaque, then it's very difficult to understand how bias will manifest itself in that space. And it's those sorts of areas I think we need to get right to make sure that people have trust in the systems in that space. It's a very, it's super interesting. How do you measure bias? How do you measure trust? I mean, all those things I think is really challenging.
I mean, 3 weeks ago when, you kindly invited me to your breakfast seminar, I think for at least 45 minutes, the debate around the table had, the data theme in some shape or form was the biggest friction point, right? So, I mean, clearly that's a topic that you're dealing with and have always dealt with, right? What is old and what is new when it comes to these models in terms of data readiness?
Oh, that's a big question. And again, we're seeing at that sort of data industry level, we're seeing a huge shift in awareness of, again, we've got the traditional understanding of what data used to look like in terms of relational databases and the traditional structure that we expected around that. AI needs different. AI needs context, and typically it doesn't see context as sets of relational tables. It's much more, we call them knowledge graphs. It's basically a set of connected entities that sit within there. But then you've got the challenge about how do you represent that? How do you create some sort of order around that? And there are techniques around that. We do a lot with ontologies and helping organizations understand how would you define your organization as an ontology, because that then gives structure for your graph. And that then gives context and meaning that you can provide to AI. And it allows it to be much more impactful and much more meaningful in terms of how it responds to some of the problems that we place for it. And as we expand out into the world of agentic workflows, and that context becomes even more important because it's not just single atomic operations that we're trying to see value from. It's a collection of connected steps and tasks that we need to have that contextual thread running through for it to be able to drive value. So understanding how you structure data and what good data structure for AI looks like is really, really key.
So coming up to, I guess, the close of the conversation, but you've both hinted at future states. I'd like, obviously, to leave the audience with hope, aspiration, and velocity. So what does the next 18 months look like from your vantage point? And what piece of advice would you give the C-suite in terms of historic lessons you've learned, all the exposure you've had across your clientele in terms of how they move safely but boldly forward with AI readiness? Simon?
Ooh. For us at the moment, the world of agents and agentic workflow and all that for us is training ground for what we see as this. We call it the autonomic future. Yeah. Autonomic nervous systems, breathing, it's all things that happen in the background to maintain a particular state given goals and guardrails and KPIs. That's really where we see agents evolving into this very autonomous learning guided with state and history, these entities that will sit in the background and do jobs for us, do functions. We will define what they are, we'll define what their guardrails are and what their ceilings and floors look like in that space. And then they'll do the job, and they will carry on working in that way until we tell them otherwise or they need to tell us something. And that's how we see agents evolving, not this tasks, big part of what they do, but they are just a part of what they do. And it's also not singularly based around LLMs. I mean, it allows us to call on traditional machine learning models or just simple process workflows if we need to. Where we see the really interesting thing is if you then have a collection of organizations that are working within the same supply network, working in that similar way, communication becomes way less frictionful. And that really then starts to change the dynamics of the economies of doing business with one another. That's how we see this sort of panning out. And it's super exciting. Yep. And it's getting really close now.
Yep.
But agents and the agentic world for us is sort of a training ground for what we see as the next evolution of this.
And words of advice?
Keep going. And don't, I was going to say don't give up, but I mean, and people aren't, but it's be bold and experiment and look at your business through different lenses, because it's not about automating what we do today. It's about changing what we do tomorrow, because that's the real key for us. If you, I mean, the MIT study, I mean, was it 95% of all AI projects failed to deliver the expected value, or however they phrased it. But that, if you drill into that report, they were automating today's processes, and that's not what it's about. It's about changing what we do tomorrow, and that's really where we would love people to focus and be bold.
Excellent. Love that. Love that. How about you, Gareth?
I mean, it's a very big question. I think that what am I expected to see from a technology change point of view over the next 18 months? I don't think we're necessarily going to see a really dramatic change in the scale or capability of models over that period. I think we're waiting for a breakthrough in terms of actually the fundamental architecture of AI models to see a really big change in capability within that period. So I think what we'll see over that period from is probably a consolidation. I suspect that we will see some really interesting progress in grounding and trustworthiness of models at a technical level. So, I think, we've gone from a kind of retrieval augmented generation or RAG world to kind of knowledge graphs, to kind of graph RAG. I think we're still on a journey towards models that will be better and more grounded. I think we'll have multiple models checking each other's homework and sort of allowing us to have greater security around these things. And that trust in the capability of models will enable more agentic workflows, because only once you've got, well to the very edges of the bell curve, as I was talking about before, in terms of the predictability and trust of outputs, that you can meaningfully then rely on those things to carry out agentic workflows without a human in the loop that sort of slightly undermines the whole thing. I think that legislation will inevitably lag slightly behind technology. I think we will see some good clarification from a European perspective. I think we'll continue to see more legislation in more other areas that actually leads to complexity. So my recommendation there is get on top of that governance early and set a high standard internally for your processes that allows your people to innovate against that high standard with knowledge and security of what they're going to do is going to be approved and go through into production within your organization. And it also means that you're almost certainly exceeding whatever standards are then going to be implemented in the various different markets that you're working in. So it gives you a much smaller gap to close when that legislation does come in. And I absolutely agree with Simon. Don't be put off. There is a huge prize to be won here for the people who do actually go ahead and get this stuff right. The fact that it's slightly difficult to do that shouldn't put people off doing it. I think if we were to look at the MIT study and we were to do the same thing for where have people meaningfully implemented microprocessors into their workflow in 1979, for instance, we'd probably have seen a similar failure rate.
Exactly.
So the fact that the early adopters have not had great successes is not a reason for people to back away from this technology. The promise is still absolutely enormous.
I think one of the interesting dynamics is that sometimes those prizes aren't always immediately obvious or visible.
Yeah.
But we've seen that over and over again in history. I mean, I forget when it was it 1911, the Wright brothers, when they started flying? Yeah. Who would have known what that led to in terms of aviation? But again, that was an invention that followed by iterations of innovation to give us all sorts of different technologies, transport mechanisms. No one could have imagined that the previous year, and you talked about flying, and everyone would have gone, what? And we're in that same situation now.
The classic overestimate progress in 2 years, underestimate it in 10.
Yeah. Exactly. So it sounds like it's not a matter of if, but when. The when is up to you and your own personal journey and your own, needs and opportunities as an organization. But what's clear is everyone needs to start if they're serious about a sustained future, irrespective of vertical or industry. The application of AI is pervasive, and there's safe ways to do it. And of course, to gain counsel along the way, right? Take advice. It's really important to start early. That was brilliant. What I'd love to do is give you both an opportunity. If there's anything you were doing in the near future, in the coming weeks or early next year, 2026, let the audience know. Where can they find you? How can they reach you? Either, company, email, or personally. Simon?
So we're about to announce a set of podcasts on our website and through LinkedIn that talk about this autonomic future. What does that look like? And how do we see that shaping businesses and the direction of travel for technology within those organizations? And what does that mean in terms of the data and to Gareth's point, things like governance, which is hugely important, but also what type of possibilities does that open up? So, I mean, I would, if anybody's interested in that and everybody's sort of deeply fascinated in knowledge graphs and ontologies, and it's not too boring, I promise, our website, which is foilalai.co.uk, have a look on there because that's where we're going to start publishing these things. I think it's in January. We're going to start the very beginning of January for that.
Lovely.
Yep.
Well, I'll be subscribing. Yeah, absolutely.
I will too. In terms of DLA Piper, we've literally just had our tech summit, as you very kindly mentioned. Off the back of that, we have a campaign we're calling Algorithm to Advantage, which is all about helping to bring AI clarity to our clients. So I would encourage everyone to come along and go to dlapiper.com and have a look for our Algorithm to Advantage campaign. You can find a slightly smarter picture of me in a suit with a tie on our website as well, and you can find me on LinkedIn. So very, very happy to connect with folks.
And I can attest to both of you being very engaging as in the flesh. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Simon and Gareth. So that's it from us. So I'm going to just close out saying I've thoroughly enjoyed today. Hopefully our audience has as well. You can get hold of us at www.redsand.ai or just email us at hello@redsand.ai. Thank you.